the end of the Disinformation Project. They have pulled the plug, and, well, some people are popping the champagne corks in response to this. But what was the Disinformation Project, and why should we be celebrating? Why in particular, perhaps, is the Free Speech Union celebrating? Educational Partnership Manager at Free Speech Union, Nick Hanne, joins us on the program. Nick, kia ora, good morning.
Morning, Andrew. Great to be with you.
So, firstly, a bit of a background. The Disinformation Project, pretentious title, but what did they actually do?
Well, they were set up in February of 2020, right before, of course, COVID hit New Zealand, and we went into lockdown, and we faced all of this, sort of challenge around information relating to COVID. Their remit, though, went much broader than that, and they were obviously they weren't an official government agency. They were not created by Parliament or by some sort of executive order, but they created themselves, and they were a small group of intellectual sort of wannabes, I guess you could put it, if I'm being unflattering about it, but they were academics coming from a university background who wanted to specialize in this area of what they called misinformation, disinformation. And so they looked for ways in which they could expose the conspiratorial thinking that was particularly alive online, the internet space.
Now, part of the challenge to that, I mean, nothing against, exalting the truth and exposing lies. I think the Free Speech Union would also be in favour of that, but it's the strategy that is a little bit concerning, and the fact that they became the gatekeepers of what was true and what wasn't true, what was information and what was disinformation. You said they started off independently, but were reasonably quickly under the COVID lockdown times almost became a branch of the Prime Minister's office?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a rather shadowy relationship between the Disinformation Project and government during that period. I mean, some of the questions around funding were never really properly answered. It was supposed to have been an independent organisation relying on independent funding, but there are various ways in which government can sometimes funnel money to these sorts of initiatives. So there was that real concern, and there was, I guess, in the end, a concern around how the government might use an organisation like this to give itself, I guess, the veneer of authority in the space of information or disinformation. And really the problem here is the roots of this concept of disinformation. It isn't that we don't have truth and lies and falsehoods of varying shades.
Yep.
You can sometimes get all kinds of information warfare going on in the modern day, and it's not a new thing. I mean, disinformation is actually a concept that Joseph Stalin first coined. It was a phrase he first coined in Russian. My Russian's not very good, but it was basically desinformatia, which is supposed to have been sort of, an attempt at making it sound sophisticated in French, in Russian, back in the 1920s. And it wasn't something that necessarily was picked up in the West until about the 1980s. But that term disinformation in English became, something we saw. And it really didn't grow until the internet age, because, of course, information's everywhere.
Yeah. So, and hey, my Russian's not that good either, but a brief, I suppose, translation of that. Disinformation is information that disagrees with a particular point of view. It's saying disinformation is, by definition, politically incorrect, to use an older term.
Yes, I mean, the idea is, if you can imagine two kind of overlapping circles, right, a Venn diagram, and in the middle you have the misinformation space, which is where something might be false. You've got disinformation on one side, and you've got malinformation on the other. Yep. It's all rather sort of esoteric, really, rather intellectual, conceptualizing. But basically, what it is someone saying there is information which isn't true, and we want to show you that it isn't true, but we're going to couch it in these sophisticated terms. And effectively, governments then use this type of terminology to discredit opposition, to discredit opposing narratives from their political opponents or from people that just are questioning the government and its actions. So I think we've got to be really skeptical when you come across these concepts and people making these sorts of claims. What makes it so special that they have the particular this corner of the market on information? Why they need to be the ones who discern and decipher for us on our behalf is something of a mystery here.
And I think one of the big problems with the Disinformation Project generally and this movement as such is they don't show us why something is true. They state that something is true and that anything that has a contrary view is disinformation without proving their case, without the contest of ideas, which the Free Speech Union, of course, attempts to uphold.
Yeah, and that's right. It's this idea that they do everything it's so sophisticated, it's so complex that the average person just couldn't really, figure this out for themselves. They couldn't decipher it for themselves. So you need these experts, so-called experts, to come in. And so it was led by people like Kate Hanne and Sanjana Haratawa, who consider themselves these experts, right? They thought they were pioneering in this field. Really, all it seems they did was they helped to, at least initially, provide this sort of veneer of legitimacy to what the government was doing. Now, again, I'm not saying there's a government conspiracy here, but it just happened that these two, the government and the Disinformation Project, really seem to be working off the same song sheet. So you can read into it what you like, but ultimately they're just similar bedfellows, right? They're just people coming from a very similar political and social sort of background, ideological background, and they found themselves, really reinforcing each other. So I think we're relieved that they're gone now. That's not to say the problem has gone, though.
Any particular reason given as to why they decided to pull the plug? Lack of government funding, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's perhaps a lack of funding. I think, too, though, that the public buy-in was waning. I think a lot of people have become skeptical over the last 4 years, particularly. The COVID experience, more than anything, has really made people question, well, hold on a second, just because someone says they're an authority, that they have some sort of credential behind their name, does that really mean that they are giving us an unbiased perspective here on what's going on? So, people have become much more skeptical too. And I think we will see. I don't think the problem's gone away, though, in the sense that we still have a lot of people who think that information needs to be vetted and it needs to go through this kind of silo, which only those in authority can really operate on our behalf.
So, Disinformation Project, is it likely to pop up in another form? I mean, these individuals are still active in this space. Is it just going to pop up with a different hat on?
I mean, we'll have to see in terms of the individuals involved. And our beef isn't with the individuals per se. We've had some major sort of conflicts in terms of the argument, but really what we're trying to say is be careful, because it's a culture, it's a way of thinking that has become very pervasive in recent years. And we really want people to take more ownership of this idea that you can, for the most part, go through and do your own research, but obviously be careful. I mean, we're not saying, hey, there's no kind of malicious intent out there, or there's no kind of I mean, there is a major problem in terms of information out there not always being vetted, not always being thought through properly. And there are a lot of people who have a vested interest in getting a narrative across. So we're not saying there isn't sometimes a problem. There are some problems in this area, but we can't have a small group of people acting as the arbiters of what is true and what isn't. And that's our real concern.
If for no other reason that it pushes back against the concept of free speech, and the Disinformation Project and the Free Speech Union could never happily coexist, because I suppose ideologically you're coming from very different places.
Absolutely, yeah. And we just want to, make the point that, George Orwell said that never use a big word when you can use a short one or a small one, right? If you can say the same thing with a small word, then say it. And it's this idea that we don't need people pretending or dressing up in these sort of pseudo-intellectual or pseudo-academic ways and making something which is actually accessible to the average person, but they're trying to make it inaccessible. They're trying to make it so that people need to depend on them for the true version of what's going on. And we just think that's a recipe for disaster.
Well, hey, something to celebrate in this instance with the disestablishment of the Disinformation Project, as it were. Meanwhile, of course, the Free Speech Union continues to be something which is funded essentially by public donation, people that are concerned about this particular area, and people can find out more about the organisation and also consider supporting it at fsu.nz. Nick, thanks for what you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Cheers.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.